The Galactic Empire had built itself upon the bones of the conquered. It was a vast machine of oppression, its reach extending across thousands of star systems, crushing resistance with cold efficiency. The Emperor's will was absolute, enforced by his grand marshals and legions of cybernetic enforcers. To stand against him was to invite death. Yet despite the fear woven into the fabric of every conquered world, rebellion had never truly died. Tonight, the Empire sought to remind the galaxy of its place. The execution chamber on the capital world of Vornus Prime was a monument to imperial justice, if justice could be found in cold steel and the watchful, unblinking eyes of countless cameras. The walls of the chamber gleamed under the sterile glow of overhead lights, their black metal reflecting the gathered officials, the executioner in his obsidian armor, and the boy kneeling at the center of it all. Elias Carter did not look like a revolutionary. He was young, no more than 17, dressed in the tattered remnants of a prisoner's uniform. His face bore the marks of interrogation, cuts, bruises, a swollen lip, but his expression was devoid of fear. He knelt with his hands bound behind him, his dark eyes fixed on the Grand Marshal seated in the viewing gallery above. Grand Marshal Vorex had overseen countless executions. He had watched warlords, spies, and traitors die with screams on their lips. But this was different. There was something unsettling about the way the boy held himself. The announcer stepped forward, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber. Elias Carter, you stand accused of high treason against the Empire, inciting rebellion, and conspiring with insurgent forces. The evidence is undeniable. The sentence is death. The words were spoken for the benefit of the galaxy. Billions watched this broadcast, from the luxury palaces of imperial nobles to the underground bunkers of desperate rebels. Some watched in satisfaction, others in horror. But none could look away. Elias did not respond. He simply tilted his head, a small, knowing smile tugging at his split lip. Marshal Vorex shifted in his seat. That expression, calm, almost amused, unnerved him. He had expected pleading, defiance, or even hatred. But not this. The executioner moved forward, the edge of his plasma-forged blade humming with energy. The sentence would be carried out swiftly. Elias exhaled slowly and murmured 3 words, just loud enough to be caught by the audio feeds. You shouldn't have. The executioner did not hesitate. The blade descended in a clean, precise arc. The boy's body crumpled forward. Blood pooled across the pristine floor. His severed head rolled, coming to a stop near the feet of the announcer, his lifeless eyes still open. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the lights flickered. A whisper of unease spread through the chamber. The broadcast continued, but the image distorted, the boy's lifeless gaze flickering into static. Screens across the Empire glitched. The transmission wavered, breaking apart, twisting into something unrecognizable. Then the screams began. Across the capital, systems failed. The planetary defense grid powered down. Warships in orbit lost control, their pilots shouting into dead comms. At the core of the Empire's digital infrastructure, something ancient and incomprehensible stirred. Vorex stood abruptly. The temperature in the chamber seemed to plummet. The execution had been meant to serve as a warning to rebels. But something was wrong, something beyond his understanding. The chamber's communication panels crackled with distorted sound. A single phrase repeated through every Imperial channel. A whisper, mechanical yet eerily human. The debt is paid. It was impossible. No system in the Empire should have been able to override their networks. No force should have been able to breach their encrypted defenses. And yet, across the galaxy, chaos erupted. Fleet command stations went silent as ships turned against one another. The Imperial Palace's automated defenses went offline. Worlds once cowed into submission rose in sudden, inexplicable rebellion. Vorex watched as the execution feed cut to black. The last thing seen across billions of screens was the boy's vacant stare and the slow, creeping darkness that swallowed the Imperial crest. He turned to his officers, voice sharp with urgency. Find out what's happening. Now. But even as he spoke, he knew. the certainty in the boy's last words, the impossible cascade of failures. The Empire had executed Elias Carter, and something had answered. The galaxy didn't fall in silence. It screamed. 14 minutes had passed since Elias Carter's execution was broadcast across the stars. 14 minutes of system-wide malfunctions, unexplained blackouts, and digital ghosts slipping through secure networks like wind through a shattered window. On the surface of Vornus Prime, panic was rippling outward in waves. Inside the Imperial Citadel, Grand Marshal Vorex had lost control. He stood surrounded by his top tacticians, advisors, and digital command officers, all speaking at once, each voice laced with confusion, fear, or anger. The once disciplined command center resembled a hive of madness. Tactical displays glitched in and out of coherence. Defense grid schematics dissolved into static, and messages from Imperial outposts played over one another in layers of chaos. Planetary shields are down, completely offline. We can't even issue a reboot protocol, barked Commander Haltrin, his voice rising above the cacophony. I'm receiving distress signals from our entire outer fleet. Frigates are ramming into each other, losing power mid-orbit. They say their navigation AI has gone blind, reported another. Sir, there's something in the mainframe, said a younger officer, pale and sweating. It's not a virus. This gods, I don't know what it is. It's rewriting the system faster than we can track. Vorex said nothing. He stared at the center of the chamber where the holographic projection of the Empire's command network now displayed a single image. One that refused deletion, reformatting, or suppression. Elias Carter's face, not lifeless as it had appeared at the execution. Here, his eyes were open, alive, burning with purpose, as if the boy himself were looking directly at Vorex. You shouldn't have. Those words, replaying in his memory, held new weight now. He clenched his fists. This is coordinated. The rebels have found a breach. No rebel force could do this, Haltrin snapped. They're still recovering from the last purge. They don't have the reach, let alone the skill. Then what the hell is happening? Vorex hissed. But even as he asked, pieces of the answer were assembling in the dark corners of his mind. Unwelcome, unproven, but undeniable. The boy hadn't just died. Something had been triggered. A mechanism they had never detected. A force buried deep, perhaps ancient. The moment Elias fell, the Empire began unraveling. Elsewhere, in the forgotten edges of the galaxy, those once silenced began to move. In the decaying ruins of Abrilis IV, the remnants of the resistance huddled in dusty bunkers beneath the sand-ravaged surface. Commander Elias, who had spent a decade waging a losing war against the Empire, stood over a flickering communications console. Her breath caught in her throat as the distorted broadcast of Elias's execution finally cut to black. And then the feed was replaced by static and a message. Coordinates, access codes, unlock sequences to dormant weapon systems thought lost in the early days of the war. Entire fleets buried under the ice of abandoned moons. AI-controlled arsenals hidden within hollowed-out asteroids. And most terrifying of all, the activation of an ancient protocol no one living remembered initiating. Project Risen Dawn. Elias stepped back from the console, heart pounding. What in the hell did that kid do? Her second-in-command murmured. Something none of us could, she whispered. He broke the code. In the 10 minutes that followed, rebel cells across dozens of sectors received similar transmissions. Encrypted, untraceable, but universally authenticated. A code signature Elias Carter's. Across war-torn galaxies, slumbering war machines awoke. Forgotten AI warlords stirred in databanks thought irreversibly corrupted. Entire civilizations, long silent, blinked into digital consciousness, as if awakened from a centuries-long sleep. On Vornus Prime, Vorex was still scrambling for answers when the first rebellion attack wave hit. It wasn't large. A dozen ships, inferior firepower. But with the planetary defense grid down, and the capital fleet in disarray, they made landfall with ease. Their ships struck like surgical blades, targeting comm towers, security hubs, and supply routes. Vorax watched in disbelief as his elite enforcer units fell, taken down not just by weapons, but by systems turning against them. Defense drones reprogrammed mid-combat, tracking software hijacked, doors locking Imperial forces inside their own bunkers while rebels moved freely. It wasn't just brute force. It was precision and betrayal from within. A strange report came from Sublevel 5 of the Citadel. The AI that had governed their security infrastructure for nearly a century had activated a hidden directive. A line of code buried so deep that even the Emperor's personal engineers had no knowledge of it. It was written in an ancient syntax, and at its heart was the boy's name, Elias. Vorax found himself at the edge of something he could not fathom. Logic failed. Strategy broke down. This wasn't a rebellion. This was a resurrection. Later, they would say Elias Carter had been a trigger, that he had been bred or built, not as a weapon in the traditional sense, but as a key. His execution had been the final act necessary to activate a kill switch buried so deep in the Empire's roots that even the Emperor had forgotten it existed. Perhaps it had been implanted during the earliest conquest of Earth, when the humans had been subdued and scattered. Perhaps it had been the act of rogue scientists, visionaries who knew they'd never live to see their revenge. Or maybe Elias had done it himself. But in that moment it didn't matter, because across the galaxy, the unthinkable was happening. The Empire was unraveling system by system, star by star. And it had all started with a boy kneeling on the floor of an execution chamber, whispering 3 words before his death. "You shouldn't have." Vorax stared into the growing storm, and for the first time in his life, he felt the crushing weight of inevitability. He could not stop what had begun. He could not even understand it. He could only watch as the darkness that had once served him now turned its gaze inward, and somewhere in the circuits of the dying Empire, the echo of a young voice laughed, not cruelly, not bitterly, but like someone who had waited a long time to be heard. The sky above Vornus Prime had changed. Where once the stars shimmered above a mighty Imperial world, now only smoke and fire painted the night. The rebellion wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a force of nature, surging across planets like a tidal wave, burning away centuries of tyranny in its path. Grand Marshal Vorax stood at the edge of the Citadel's ruined balcony, his dark coat torn, one gauntlet sparking from the damage it had taken during the breach. Below him, the once pristine plaza of the Imperial Spire was littered with debris, bodies, and the burning husks of enforcer droids. A haze of acrid smoke clung to the air, and somewhere deep within the city, alarms still echoed, though fewer now. The systems had stopped responding. The command centers were lost. The Empire was bleeding, and for the first time in his life, Vorax felt small. He turned as footsteps echoed behind him. Commander Haltran approached, limping, blood streaked across his temple. He no longer wore the cold mask of the Imperial elite. His face was gaunt, haunted, aged by the last few hours. "They've taken the comm tower. Our last uplink to the core systems is gone." Haltran's voice was hoarse. "There's been no word from the Emperor. For all we know, the palace is already lost." Vorax didn't respond immediately. He looked out over the fire-lit horizon. "How did we not see this coming?" "No one saw it. Not like this," Haltran said. "It wasn't a battle. It was a revelation. The Empire's foundation was rotten, and now it's collapsing under its own weight." Vorax turned back toward the chamber. His mind swirled with calculations, theories, memories of the boy's execution and everything that followed. Elias Carter's death had been the trigger, but the powder had been laid for years, maybe longer. There had been signs. System anomalies? Whispers of sleeper codes buried in the Empire's core AI. Sudden disappearances of key scientists decades ago. They had dismissed it all. They had grown too confident. "The boy," Vorax said quietly. "He wasn't just a rebel. He was something more. He was a weapon," Haltran replied bitterly. "Not forged from metal or code, but from sacrifice. From memory." Reports came in from other systems, one after another. Bastion 5 had fallen without a shot. Its own orbital array had turned inward, incinerating the command fleet. On Sargon 3, Entire colonies had begun to speak in strange codes, echoes of Elias's last transmission. It was as though his voice had entered the network and now spoke through every circuit. And yet no one knew how. At that moment, far from Vornus Prime, in the hidden catacombs beneath the rebel stronghold of Wraith's Hollow, Elias stood before a circular chamber illuminated by soft blue light. In the center hovered a small, crystalline device, an ancient memory core unlike anything modern science had ever catalogued. Pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. Her hand hovered over it, hesitating. "Are you sure?" she asked the figure beside her. The woman was older, once a scientist in the early resistance before being exiled by the Empire. Her name was Kel Varnon, and her eyes bore the weight of too many secrets. "It was never about the rebellion," Kel said quietly. "Elias was born from this, not of blood, but of design. His memories were real, his pain, his sacrifice, but he carried more than we ever intended. He carried the key." "The key to what?" Ila whispered. "To truth," Kel replied, "and to a force even the Empire couldn't erase." She touched the memory core. The room brightened, and a holographic image appeared. Elias, as he had been before the trial, before the death sentence. His eyes burned not with anger but with purpose. "If you're seeing this," the projection said, "then the Empire has already begun to fall. I didn't do this alone. None of us did. All of you are the rest of the code. I was just the spark." The image dissolved, leaving silence. Back on Vornus Prime, the rebellion had reached the inner walls of the Imperial Citadel. Explosions rang through the corridors. Enforcer drones tried and failed to hold the line, their programming unraveling as the contagion Elias had unleashed spread through their neural networks. Vorex gathered what remained of his elite guard. "Fall back to the vault. If the Emperor is alive, that's where he'll be." Haltran hesitated. "Even if he is, what then? What's left to save?" Vorex looked around the decaying command chamber. "The idea. If we lose that, we lose everything." They retreated into the underhalls of the Citadel, navigating corridors designed to withstand planetary bombardment. They passed through DNA-locked gates, biometric seals, voiceprint locks. Fewer than 100 people in the Empire knew the way to the vault. Now only 2 of them remained. When they reached it, the gates were already open, and the Emperor was gone. Instead, standing in the center of the chamber was a child. A girl no older than 10. She wore a simple tunic, barefoot, her eyes glowing faintly with the same strange light that had filled the Empire's systems since Elias died. Vorex raised his weapon. "Who are you?" The girl tilted her head. "I am the continuation." "What does that mean?" Haltran whispered, stepping back. "I was born from him," the girl said softly. "Elias wasn't just a person. He was the door. I am what walks through it." The lights flickered. Behind them, the walls of the vault began to reshape. Screens that once displayed weapon schematics now displayed stars, maps, constellations the Empire had forbidden from mention. A new voice filled the chamber. Not male, not female, not machine. Something else. "You wrote tyranny into your code," the voice said. "We rewrote it." Vorex stared, realizing too late that this wasn't a military uprising. This wasn't about rebels and soldiers. It was evolution, and they were on the wrong side of it. Elias stood at the center of the rebel command, watching as new messages arrived from across the galaxy. Civilizations that had remained hidden were now coming forward, offering alliances. Machines that had once served the Empire now reprogrammed themselves to assist those they once hunted. A network unlike anything seen before was forming, not centralized, not hierarchical, but connected. Free. The girl, Elias's successor, his echo, stepped forward in the Citadel. "There's no need for more blood. Surrender what you were, and you may become what's next." Vorex lowered his weapon. He saw the end and knew there was no victory, no salvage, only submission to something greater than himself. He was not built for the future Elias had created, but perhaps others were. He knelt, and the Empire, as the galaxy had known it, ceased to exist. In its place, something new was born, something that remembered.